So we have transformation and healing expert Dr. Kylie Hanish with us today. You said call you Kylie?
Yes.
That's easy because Dr. Kylie Krikorian Hanish. I'm like, oh, that's a lot.
Dr. K.
Yay. So I've just been ingesting everything that you are doing, and it's just the work that you do is so incredibly important. But let's go back and kind of start with your story. Tell us a little bit about your pregnancy.
I was pregnant with my first child in 2005. And then I was 35 weeks pregnant, and I went into labor early. And I went to the doctor, and at that point I learned my son had died in utero. So,
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. And I went into shock. I went into shock for 6 months, but just not knowing what to do. And there wasn't anybody there telling me, these are things that you should consider doing during this time. Because I wasn't the first person that this has happened to.
Right.
I mean, it happens a lot. Like in the U.S., there's 26,000 babies that are stillborn a year.
Wow. Wow, so what are some of the things that you were saying that what do you wish they told you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wish they would have told me to spend more time with him. Because it's the one time that you're meeting your baby and saying goodbye at the same time. And so that there's ways to parent your child, even though they're not living, that you can bathe them, you can dress them, you can take photos, you can sing to them, read them story, like all of that, and just being with them. It's because it's the only time ever that you will.
Right.
And I just felt like that the attitude of the hospital staff was very much like he was a piece of trash because he wasn't alive.
Oh, gosh.
Rather than, even though
it's very clinical.
Yeah, it is a very sad and tragic time, but it can also be beautiful in those memories that you're making with the baby. So I just wish that there was more guidance on what to do with the baby rather than just like, oh, he's dead, you can hold him. And we did take pictures with him. And there's a great group out there called Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep that goes in. They're volunteer photographers. They go in and do bereavement photography in the hospitals.
And were you connected with them?
I wasn't. They just formed in Colorado like that year, so I wasn't. So we took photos ourselves, and they actually recently touched the photos up for us.
Oh, wow.
Which was right when the film came out, they gave it to us as a gift. So it was like nice to look at your baby and see them for who they are as a baby. And so now I have the photo framed on my desk. It's beautiful.
That is beautiful. And so, you said for 6 months. I mean, you must have been in shock, you and your husband both. And how did the days that followed kind of go with your husband, and what happened with your life? Like, how did that?
Well, I don't remember a lot from it because I felt like we both shut down, but separately. So we were kind of on parallel tracks, grieving, but just not interacting really, not with ourselves or with anybody else.
So you just kind of went on autopilot. And
and
how do you go back to work and you're back to your regular life and just kind of...
And you're trying to survive. I mean, like, I was probably, I don't know, like in bed the other thing is you physically had a baby, so you have to physically recover from that whole process. So.
Right. And where do you feel like the shift happened? Where?
I felt like after 6 months, I was like sitting in bed, and then I'm like, you know what? Okay, I'm ready to re-engage in life again. And nothing really spurred that. It just kind of happened. But then I signed up to go back and take a college course and all that. And then I got pregnant with my daughter. And then I was like, then that was a whole different, experience of being completely out of control, anxious, not knowing if your baby's going to live. So
what did you do differently with the second pregnancy to control your anxiety? I think we're always anxious when we're pregnant, but I can imagine with the second one that it was heightened to a level that is unimaginable. So what did you do? What did you do differently from the first to the second?
Well, I pretended I wasn't pregnant. I mean, not in the sense that I went to the doctor visits and all that, but I hid it from everyone. I didn't tell anyone. And my philosophy was, if I didn't get attached to the baby, then if the baby died, it wouldn't hurt so bad. I mean, it's not very healthy.
No, but it's a coping.
understandable.
I mean, that's an inherent coping mechanism that I think all of us feel when you've been hurt or you've been touched by any kind of trauma or pain, you shut down from it and you try to protect yourself from it again. I think that would be normal for you.
Yeah.
Did you do that for the entire pregnancy, or did someone help at some point say, Kylie, connect? I don't know where your husband was during this time. Was he able to experience that pregnancy with you and be able to have any joy in it, or did it just was kind of shut off?
Yeah, I think we both felt similarly. And then I went on to have a second or a third child.
Yeah.
Like 5 years after my daughter was born.
Yeah.
And that was still, it wasn't as bad because it wasn't as close, but it was still like, I was 8 months pregnant and I hired a doula because I tried to recreate like a nice birth experience.
Right.
A little less trauma in there. And she's like, you're going to have a baby, Kylie. You have to talk to the baby. And I'm like, but you don't know that for sure.
Right.
So it's a hard time. And I think just with that, it's really important to educate moms and normalize that process of well, these are normal grieving symptoms, and then these are normal thoughts and feelings you're going to have in that pregnancy after a loss.
So I think Jackie was asking before, like, when the shift happened. So at some point you realized that I can do something with my story.
Yeah, and that major shift, that didn't happen until when the movie Return to Zero was being made. And I was really vulnerable. Like at the beginning, I was very scared of people knowing my story. And it's like a lot of bad things about, your deep, dark secrets. And
but that was you and your husband together who created that movie.
Yeah.
And I mean, so it was your idea to tell your story, even as scary as it is.
Yeah.
So how did you go from, this is my story, I'm living with this pain, I'm kind of like protecting myself from the outside world, to, wow, maybe this could help other people? I mean, was that the intent of the movie? Or was it just to kind of like go through your own process?
Well, I think my husband, he's a filmmaker, so that was a story that he felt he needed to tell. And it wasn't, I didn't really get involved in it until it was in production, and there's been on social media such a huge response from people around the world because they felt like their story was being told.
Right.
And that their experience was validated. And so I think when I learned that the movie was helping people in their lives, that was more important than me being scared or sheltered. And then I learned if I could share my experience to help other people, then it was worth it.
But you've taken this movie one step further in creating Return to Zero, the Healing Center, and also these retreats that people can go to. And it's all specific to stillborn, miscarriage, and also
infant loss.
What kind of experiences have you had? I mean, has this been, when you set out to create this, is it what you expected? Or, I mean, what's been the response to your healing center and the retreats?
Well, I feel that it has chosen me rather than me going out looking for it. Like, this is the work that I'm supposed to be doing right now. And it feels amazing. And, like my idea to do the retreats came in the shower after I got an email from somebody asking for resources. And there just isn't a lot out there, and there's nothing like this. And so it's like divine inspiration. I mean, really, like, there's a greater power working through me, and being able to get people together who have been through this type of trauma. It's like communal healing. It's amazing.
Do you find that people have a hard time discussing this kind of specific loss versus a child dying in a car accident? Or, I mean, is it a different?
I think it's different because not a lot of people know the baby, only the parents really, and maybe the extended family.
Right.
And it most of the time hasn't lived outside the womb, or at least not for very long. So people think they don't know what to say first. I mean, in general, people don't know what to say when somebody dies, but when somebody dies that hasn't really lived a full life, then they're at a loss for words. And so I think it is different. It isn't talked about very much. But once you bring it up, you'll hear people like, oh, that happened to my mom, or that happened to my sister, and that happened to my friend.
Right.
It seems like it's so extremely common. I mean, 1 out of 4 pregnancies result in miscarriage. But it's one of those things, too, that people just aren't as understanding, it seems, unless you've gone through it yourself. You know, because like you were just saying, like losing a child in a car accident, like people can imagine that. And
well, I think that people would, they assume that it's a greater grief because the attachment that you've had with that child is greater because they were 6 versus the loss that is felt from a stillborn. I think that there's a misconception about attachment and those feelings, and I think that's where people
absolutely.
And it sounds like what you're trying to educate, that loss is loss, and that's still a very powerful loss, you know. And it I would, especially
when you wonder what could have been.
Well, the loss is compounded. I would imagine, I haven't had that loss. I have a different loss, and I know that my loss is compounded by the what ifs and the yearning for the what could have beens, and so it adds a layer of loss. And I think the people that haven't experienced loss regardless can't really wrap their head around it, whether it's a stillborn, miscarriage, infant loss, or a later in life loss. And I think people in general have a hard time talking about grief because it's uncomfortable.
Right. So how were you able to kind of come back, you and your husband, together and go through this together? Because I think grief and loss, while 2 people may be going through the same thing, it kind of separates.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were on separate paths for a long time, but I think the making of the movie really helped us kind of revisit a lot of our memories together. Right. And working on a project that was about our son was helpful in that. There was a lot of healing there. And how do you bring your son into your family with your daughter, and you have another child? I have a son.
Yeah. Like how do you talk about him? How do you celebrate him in your home?
I have a little, like 2 little areas in my office that are little things that are devoted to him, like his photo, a candle, little angel, stuff like that. And then, we didn't talk about him a lot with my daughter until the movie came up. But she just associates the movie with like her dad being gone. Because he's working on, So I'm sure that she's absorbing it. She's smart, but she doesn't talk about it a lot. And then the little one, he's 3, he's like, oh, he died.
Yeah, there's lack of understanding of what that means. Yeah. So how can, those of us who haven't been through this, or whether it's family, friends, coworkers, how do you think people can be more compassionate or understanding? Like what are the mistakes that people are making with somebody who's gone through that experience?
Well, I think one mistake is not saying anything at all, in just being silent, and the person feels really isolated. So I think it's important to say something, but it's also important not to say the wrong thing. So,
which is why they're silent.
Yeah. So like not to offer platitudes and cliches like, oh, you can have another baby, or this was meant to be. God, this was in God's plan, and stuff like that. So it's something as simple as, I'm so sorry for your loss, is a great thing to say. At least it's just acknowledging it. It's also nice to give them a gift, a thought. Like it could be a candle, it could be a little angel. And there's those days that are really hard for parents, like the baby's anniversary, like when they died, or when they're born and died. whatever. It could be a due date that's coming up. Like, let's say they lost the baby early and the due date's coming up, and just being sensitive and letting them know that you're thinking about them.
Right.
So we got you in right at the tail end of Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, and you wrote this incredible article on She Knows. And I love that you kind of gave some tips on how to cope with loss for women, and I specifically to women, and how they can handle in those certain stages. So will you share a couple of those tips? I printed out just in case you forgot what you wrote, which I often do. But I mean, I loved it because I think that even though it's very specific to this loss, I think it really is universal and can apply
to anybody. Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is being gentle with yourself, knowing that there are no stages of grief, that grief is crazy all over the place, and it can get better, it can get worse, and there's no timeline to it. It doesn't ever go away. Like, the intensity should get less, but it's always there because you love somebody, and that's not going to go away.
Right.
And then I love the idea of creating a sacred area in your home that's to the memory of your baby. So like I have a photo and little knick-knack type of things that maybe I buy them when I'm somewhere when I'm thinking of him, like little angels or stones or crystals, that type of stuff. But that can be a nice thing, and it doesn't have to be in your living room. It can be in your own private space,
right?
Whatever is comfortable for you. But living room's okay too. Like it just depends.
It's all on what you need and what works for you.
Do you find that people, and I'm going to let you go back to this, do you find that people are uncomfortable with that if they come to your home? Reason I'm saying, I was accused once of having a sanctuary in my house to my brother, and I was like, well, learn to deal with it because it's not coming down. But I found that people were really uncomfortable with me kind of having that presence in my house because it forced them to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Do you ever find that, or?
I'm not sure. I mean, I've never had it
public. Said it, yeah.
I've always had it.
His friends are ruder than yours.
I mean, the other thing that's weird is like if the picture of the baby, if the baby's dead, like we're not used to seeing pictures of dead people, which in the past it was more normal, but now it's not.
Right.
But they almost think that you should be over it.
Right.
Yes.
Like you can
Closure.
do this. You should do this for 3 weeks. Like I felt everyone was great for 3 weeks after our son died. Yeah. And then like after that, they just went back to their life, which they should go back to. I mean, they have a life to live.
But they also assume that you should be done after 3 weeks because they've moved on.
Yeah.
Then they then assume you should. Yeah. What are we can put it up on our website, the link, but you went on to say about making connections with your baby to go to a special place. And then Jackie mentioned it earlier. You gave some great tips for friends and family, which, and I hope that these would also apply to the hospital staff, which you spoke about earlier, not feeling like they knew what they were doing. Do you ever feel the need to train or to reach out and invite them to your retreats or anything that you're doing to make sure that they're
like Kim's latest book is training the media how to deal with people with trauma. You could do the same type of thing with healthcare.
I am doing that. I'm going into hospitals and giving trainings, and then my colleague and I have created kind of like a cheat sheet postcard for the hospitals of when your baby dies, what are things that you should consider doing? Because the hospital staff may not know, and they can look at it for themselves and give it to the parents.
Right. Because I think that also, as a healthcare worker, not myself, but they probably see loss and trauma often, that they kind of have to put that Teflon on and get themselves through, but you can't have that on when you're dealing with humans going through something so huge. But we just so appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And Return to Zero is on Netflix now, yes?
It's on Amazon Instant and iTunes right now, and hopefully coming to Netflix, but not there yet.
Not yet.
And how cool is it to have Minnie Driver play you? I mean, I want to. It's kind of cool.
And that cute guy from.
Paul Adelstein.
Yeah, I always forget his name. Well, he's not so cute on Scandal, but he was cute on The Practice.
Yeah. Well, returntozerohealingcenter.com, you can find more information on what you're doing and also the retreats and where people can find information in their towns, right? I saw some resources on there. And then I hope people check you out your movie out on Amazon Prime and iTunes.
Yes.
And thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank
Dr.
you.
K. I want to give you props for the doctor. That's hard
Dr. KH.
Yeah.
Dr. KKH.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
And we will be right back with Broadscast.
Well, welcome back.
Welcome back to Broadscast. Wow, I'm like jumping in my seat. We were saying goodbye and...
I know, sorry. I don't know why I'm
what
sorry.
What are you sorry for?
We're not supposed to say we're sorry.
Ladies, stop saying you're sorry. Kim, stop saying you're sorry.
Sorry.
I'm sorry I gave you a hard time about saying sorry. I love Kylie. She was just... we've honored many, many women here, broads, we like to call them, for going through like these experiences and not only coming out a little bit on the other side, but being able to share your experience and to teach and to support. It's just such, and this isn't against men, but I just think women especially, like that compassion, that nurturing, and that ability to take something so difficult and to really connect with other people.
Yeah, I
you do it every day.
She alludes, mentioned how isolating it can be. And I think that's the one thing that if we're willing to put ourselves out there a little bit, you really do find that there's lots of people that connect and they resonate with what you're feeling and thinking. And it sounds like it took her some time to feel comforted by that. It's scary and vulnerable to put yourself out there, but then you're like, wait, it's actually working and I'm not the only one. And even though people are watching, I think that the connection that was being made and the impact hopefully is pretty profound in her healing process too.
But I think what's really important is because, and you and I have talked about this, but sometimes when you go through something and you see other people who've gone through a similar circumstance and then they're doing something positive with it, it can make another person feel like, wow, why am I still stuck in my stuff? While that person's out there, being an advocate or teaching or doing something with it. And it doesn't mean that you're past it. It doesn't mean that you're over it. You found the closure. It just means you're in a different part of the journey, not to be cliche, but so I like the fact that Kylie could talk about it and you've talked about your experience in a way where the pain is still there, the loss is still there, but you've just been able to get to a place where you can share this and everybody has their own timing. It doesn't mean like, wow, it was 6 months later when she got out of bed and it's been 9 months for me and I'm not out of bed. Like, give yourself a break.
Yeah. Well, I think, the other side to that too, though, is that not everybody, she's talked about it being like a calling for her. Not everybody, A, hears the calling, B, listens to it or wants it, and I think, and we started the show with saying that kind of a thing, that, not everybody has to be an advocate. Like just because you've had an experience doesn't mean that you then have to go be a champion for that cause. Sometimes your own experience is more than enough to handle. I've said that from my own. Like I go in and out of wanting to be an advocate. It's exhausting. It's burdensome. It's tiring, but it's also really important. And it never stops.
24/7.
So I think that, it sounds like she kind of gave herself permission to feel what she felt and then move through it at different paces and kind of almost sounds like the movie forced her a little bit into maybe having to face some of those things that maybe she wasn't otherwise. I'm just making an assumption,
and creating the movie was, her husband's way of addressing and moving to a different level, perhaps, and we're not always on the same page when it comes to moving in that direction,
Yeah. I wonder what that conversation was like in their house.
Yeah.
I want to do the movie. I don't want you to do the movie. I wonder like if she was on board. I wish I would have asked her that, but didn't want to go too far off topic.
Yeah.
I like the interaction between couples, and you were talking about like how did they do this together or didn't they?
Right.
I think for a lot of people, loss can absolutely tear a family apart. And it is such a strain on marriages, relationships that it's hard to nurture those relationships when you're dealing with a loss that feels so isolating and paralyzing and depressive. And
it's amazing how two people can go through the same thing and just not, it drives a wedge between them as opposed to brings them together. So, yeah. Anyway. It's funny because after I had I found out I had the breast cancer gene and I had surgery and all those things. And I went back to my doctor who had really kind of blown it off and was like, what are the chances? And so I went back to him and I said, I just feel like you did me a huge disservice. You talked it down. You played it like it wasn't something that could happen. And if, that I wouldn't have the gene. And if I did, we'd deal with it. Like he was just very cavalier about it. And when I went back and addressed it, he said, you don't have to be an advocate for everybody else. Like you've just been through a trauma. Why don't you just go through your trauma? And like, I'm not that person. Like I feel like my life experiences have been given to me in order to provide me with a voice and maybe an experience or, not necessarily an expertise, but at least compassion and understanding for other people who go through similar things.
Right. But I think that, I guess there's a part of me that wasn't surprised when Kylie was saying that the hospital dealt with it the way that they did. I met with someone yesterday that works with at-risk youth, and she trains law enforcement who are first responders oftentimes to these kinds of kids. And she said they have no training with mental health, behavioral health, emotional feelings as it relates to kids. They're very, law enforcement focused and what's right and wrong and legalities of things, that they have no ability to be compassionate, and they have to be taught that. And so she goes in and she teaches these law enforcement officers, how to be more compassionate. But if you don't have the gene, it's really hard, to rub the film off of that within you. But
especially when you're trained to serve and protect,
right? But she said that they hadn't had any training in this since like the academy. There's been nothing since to really help keep them connected, to keep them sensitive, to keep them sensitized to what's actually going on in their communities. Right. And she said it's been such an eye-opening. She said the people that now she's moving up the chain, she's got to go to the older population, like the commanders and the sergeants that haven't seen a kid in 40 years, because they're not on the beat anymore or whatever. Right. But, I think that we assume that when you're in certain types of industries that you should be kinder, more compassionate, more sensitive. And I think at the end of the day, you're just still a human. And,
right. Well, and same with like special needs. I know that there are organizations who are training police officers how to deal with certain special needs, because that could look like drug abuse. That could look like someone who's belligerent. Like you don't know if somebody has autism or another special need, if how they respond to that, it's just it fuels.
Well, but again, I think we forget sometimes that no matter what your field is, that if you're doing something that involves engaging with any kind of human contact, that being aware of your surroundings, being aware of other people's stories. You don't always know everyone's story, so I think Anyway,
so we've got like 2.5 minutes left.
Oh.
Anything new with you?
Anything new with me?
Well, I mean, today is, I just wanted, and I know that you feel the same way, like we've been on KHTS in the LA area for 6 months now. And I just wanted to thank them and for their hospitality and for having us here. But today is actually our last show here. And so we just wanted to, Peter! Woo! Peter's looking
Bring in the clowns.
We do have stuff going on, and you should definitely stay with us because Broadscast is not going away. So you can get more information. The best way to get more information is to go to our website and sign up for our newsletter, because now it just goes to your email, and you don't even have to do any work.
It just keeps popping up on your screen, so you might as well just
so
sign up
annoying.
For it.
But sign up for the newsletter. You'll get information before anybody else, because everyone knows that's what you want. And like us on Facebook. At Broadscast on Facebook.
And the Twitter.
And the Twitter at Broadscast Show. And it's
YouTube, and we're going to be on Spreaker. And
we are on Spreaker.
Oh, we are on Spreaker. That's what I meant.
Yes.
We meant.
We're on Spreaker. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram, although I never know what to put up there. And, we're everywhere, but the best place to go is broadscast.com and get that newsletter. And that way you can find us.
But again, thank you to KHTS and Peter for being our faithful listener.
Peter, you've dealt with us for a good 6 months. And,
I think we've corrupted Peter just slightly.
Yeah, Peter came in kind of like sweet and conservative, and now he's just
kicks back, puts his feet up.
I'm corrupt.
You're like one of the girls now.
Yes, I'm a corrupt woman.
So which been your favorite? I'm putting you on the spot now. Have you had any favorites in the last 6 months?
My favorite Broadscast.
Yeah, or just favorite moment, favorite broadcast.
There's a few. There's actually a bunch tied up there. We had a bunch of crazy guests, actually. The first show, it was my first show, and I forget her name, and she was on that
Shaws of Sunset.
Oh, Shaws of Sunset. Yes, MJ.
That was kind of funny and I had no idea what I was getting into. That was a fun show, and I told my mom, because my mom loves that show.
Yeah.
And so she's been a fan of yours too.
Well, we'll have to make sure we post that one on the website so people can, an encore presentation.
Right.
So we have 10 seconds left. Thank you so much to everybody listening. Sign up for our newsletter, broadscast.com.
And you will hear us next week. Just we don't know where yet.
Over and out.
We do, but you might.